Okay, we're getting to the end now, or towards the end of the process now. We've done all this great stuff from being found or finding companies, applying directly, using our resume, our CV, our LinkedIn, all the tools. We've done through so many interviews and going through interview practice, how testing and all that works. Now we're getting to the end here where we're talking about background checks, reference checks, and we'll wrap up the course. So with this lesson, we're going to talk about background checks. And background checks is a good thing, especially if somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, are you okay if we do the background check on you? That shows that you're one of the final candidates. They're not doing background checks or paying money to do an online background check on someone that they're just not going to go forward on. So that's a good thing if they reach out to you. Most times when you fill out that job application, remember way back in the course we were talking about job applications being a legal document. What you see a lot on job applications, a little box that you check that's basically in the sentence next to that little box says, I am approving and okay for the company to do a background check on me at any point in time or during this process or something like that. You're basically approving that it's okay to do a background check on you. And so you have to check that box. If you don't check the box, they're not going to go forward anyways. So you have to check that box. And so companies will run background checks on folks, which is a little different than a reference check. So a background check, the really easiest way to put it is we like you, we want to do a background check on you, and we trust you, but we need to verify it, right? It's kind of like trust but verify. Now, and this is all governed by laws too about these background checks and things, but most times they're going to either ask for your approval on a job application or afterwards ask for approval. And certainly from a legal standpoint, many times, depending on where you live in the world, they might be legal things around needing your approval. And you could say no, no, I don't approve you doing a background check on me, but companies that are asking to do background checks on you, they're just not going to hire you at that point. They're probably going to think like, that guy's got something he's hiding. What's he hiding? He probably was a thief or something happened, so we're just not going to take a risk. They won't even let us do a background check. So you have to kind of go through with that and say, yeah, okay, but they do need your approval typically. And also local laws need to be adhered to too as well from their point of view, that the applicant is notified that a background check is in process. You might have checked that box in the application way back when, gone through all your interviews and everything else, and then all of a sudden you get a note or an email from somebody saying, from a third party source typically, that we are ABC company, we're working with the XYZ company on their behalf to do a background check on you, and this is your official notification that a background check is being conducted. Again, a good sign with that because it's like, they're paying somebody to do a background check on me. So that might be I'm one of probably 2 or 3 candidates they're looking at as far as a final choice. So that's a good thing too. And then companies do engage in services to do this for them. Most companies don't have people on staff, maybe a larger company might, but most companies don't have people on staff who are experts at background checks. So they hire a company to do these kind of legal background checks, looking at different things in your past. And what are some of those things that you could be looking at in this background check? Well, most likely when you hear the word background check, you're thinking, oh, they're doing a criminal history check on me. They're going to look at me and see if I have a felony or committed a crime. Now, with the criminal history, they're not really looking at you had a parking ticket or even like a speeding ticket or anything like that, unless maybe you're in a job where you're driving, right? You're a truck driver, or a large part of your job means you're driving through a larger geographic area or territory as a district manager. For whatever reason, if it involves a lot of driving, then they might really consider things like speeding tickets, or certainly things like DUI, driving under the influence, or driving while intoxicated. Things would be very important if it's really much a driving-oriented job. But other than that, they're mostly looking at, like, have you been involved in felonies, theft, embezzlement, those types of things. They also, in a background check, can look at your credit history, which when I tell people that, it usually throws them off. They're like, why are they looking at my credit history? I mean, I guess I can understand if you're an accountant, you might look at somebody's credit history, but because you want to see if they're good at managing their own money, let alone the company's money, and that's a true statement. But why are you looking at me as just a regular employee? And I know I tend to agree with that. What do we care about a person's credit history? But for some companies, for some hiring managers, they're like, no, this shows their ability to be self-managed, and they've got a high credit score. That's really great. It shows that they're real careful with themselves, their purchasing and money, and this is all inference, by the way. It has nothing to do with the job, but they could infer like, oh, if you have a low credit score, you filed for personal bankruptcy, there must be something wrong with you or whatever. So don't worry about it. It's nothing you can kind of control, but understand that they'll look at credit reports. They're certainly looking for known addresses and contact information, kind of verifying your addresses and that you kind of are a citizen or maybe those type of things. We talked about driving records, or driving under the influence, or driving while intoxicated, other driving records. Again, small little misdemeanor things, speeding, nobody's going to care about, typically. Bankruptcies, judgments, liens, things that might be judgments or things against you from a legal standpoint, property records, marriage and divorce records. There's another one. What are they going to business looking at my marriage and divorce records? And most times they're not, but understand that might come up in a background check for, as far as a comprehensive background check. It should not make any difference. In some places, it could even be illegal to ask about marriage and divorce in an interview situation, but when they're running a full background check, they may check that. And they're certainly, may check your work history. This is different than a reference check where they're calling your references that you're providing, but they might be just checking, informally, well, actually formally, calling places, contacting places, and verifying that you worked at a place, or verifying dates of employment from a work history from a third party doing a background check on you. And so that's what it really is that, they're doing this comprehensive background to get a feel for what you've said to them is truthful, and also a little bit know more about your background around that. And usually it's just a kind of a cursory thing. Unless there's a problem, then it becomes a thing. Let's talk about that. What if you have a problem in your background? Should you disclose it before a background check? Should you disclose it, during the interview process? What should you do? So a couple of things. If you may have something that you're worried about in your background that might be coming up on a background check. If you think a paid background check is unlikely to occur anyways, then do nothing. You don't need to disclose anything. I wouldn't encourage you to disclose anything that you don't feel like disclosing. Particularly if it's a small company or something you might not be paying for a background check. They might themselves just call your references and things like that, but they're not going to pay somebody else to run a full criminal history check. Now, with the availability of the internet and online sources, it's actually pretty easy to do and not too expensive. So even small companies are doing background checks more than ever. But not everybody does. So just be aware of that. Now, it might tip them off if you're at the end of the interview process and this guy says, "This is our final interview. We'll let you know." And you have any more questions, and you say, "Yeah, you can run a background check on me." And then they're going to worry, like, "No, but I think we will now." Since you brought it up. So just be aware you don't want to bring it up. But if you don't think background check's unlikely, then you don't have to disclose. In most cases, if background check is likely, then at the very end of the interview process, then disclose if there's something that you think they should be aware of, particularly if it's something minor. And I got an example coming up here I'll share with you. If it's minor, you can just disclose like, "Hey, this may pop up. I filed for personal bankruptcy like 30 years ago. I was a young kid, didn't know how to handle my money, ran into a problem, no big deal, but I have stellar credit right now. But if that pops up, it might pop up. Otherwise, I'm perfect." Just be aware, and if it's something more serious, then you might want to discuss it too. If you're thinking a background check is likely, and really explain and help them understand it a little bit. That'll be better than having them be surprised. But you have to weigh that, right? You have to weigh that. Should I disclose or not disclose? Should I make them find it? Again, it depends on the severity, depends on different things. Or if they find it, then maybe then I can talk through it. Who knows? So I always like to be a little bit more disclosure oriented, especially if I know it's going to happen, then it'd be secretive. But that's up to you again. Let me share a good example of that where somebody had a real big issue in their background that, well, it seemed like a big issue, at least if a background report was run, background check, and the report is generated, that this person would always disclose it as part of the process, and actually became a kind of funny story in a sort of tragic way too. And the situation was the great turkey theft. Okay, this is already sounding weird, I know, but it's true. This is a true story. Not me, from somebody else, that a friend of a friend. The great turkey theft. And what happened was this person was, at the time, when I learned about this, he was in his 40s, and I was in my early 40s, and I had learned about this, and the person talked about his job history, and he said, "I'd always have to disclose when I was looking for a new job during the interview process the great turkey theft." And we're like, right? What's the great turkey theft? And what happened was, in the United States, if you're from the United States, you know about Thanksgiving. If you're not, I have so many students from around the entire world. We have this holiday in the United States called Thanksgiving, and we give thanks, right? And as part of that tradition, it's a traditional meal where you might have turkey. You know, it's like chicken but bigger. You know, so you'd have a turkey. You probably know what turkey is. So you have turkey, and when this guy was a young kid, you know, he's a young kid, and his other buddies said, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun to like steal the turkey right off the neighbor's table?" Right? So they just kind of walked in their neighbor's house, who they knew, it was no big deal, and they grabbed the turkey and they ran off with the turkey, and then they ran off with the turkey, and they thought that was so funny. Well, the neighbor, not knowing who it was who stole the turkey, he just knew the turkey was stolen and somebody had broken in, called the police. And the police investigated, and they found out that these young kids stole the turkey, and they were embarrassed and apologetic. And it was no big deal, and everybody felt bad and sorry and embarrassed. But the problem with the person who was talking, his friends were both 17, three of them. Two of them were 17, and the other person was 18. And when you're 18 in the United States, you reach age of majority, which means that if you're 17 and under, if you have something like the Great Turkey Theft, it's like, nobody will see it, right? It's kind of locked away that you did this dumb thing, right? But if you're 18, that becomes something that could end up in your record. And because the police were called and all that, they had to file a report, and that was considered theft. It was considered breaking and entry and theft. Felony breaking and entry, felony theft. At least at the time it was felony theft. I don't know if there's a value amount of theft. I'm not a legal expert in that respect. But either way, when the background checks were run for this person, it would show up and say, felony theft, in their background. And it'd be like, it's very hard to get a job if all of a sudden a background check, it pops up felony theft. If the guy would have been just 17, it never would have shown up, because legally in the United States, it wouldn't show that. But because he was 18, it shows now for the rest of his life on background checks, it could pop up and say felony theft, which can really torpedo a whole job search and job offer situation. So he always has to disclose and tell this story. He tells it in a funny manner. He says, okay, great. I'm really looking forward to working with your company. By the way, if you run a background check on me, I got this weird thing that might pop up. Let me share that with you. And of course, the interviewer is like, oh, yeah, tell me, what about the weird thing? And then he tells about the Great Turkey Theft and what an idiot he was when he was a kid. But now it has to show up for the rest of his life. And they have a laugh about it. And thus, when it shows up felony theft, they all know it's the Great Turkey Theft and it doesn't hurt them. But if he didn't do that, then it'd be like showing up as felony theft, and that's all they see. So like here's an example of what an actual report might look like, by the way, as we wrap up this lesson. They'll search by information, a person's name, their aliases, a government number, like in the United States, be a social security number, you might have some other type of ID number, and they'll then spit back out things that might be online or available for background check companies. Here's an example of embezzlement, where somebody had done embezzlement from the Virginia Administrative Office of Courts, found through U.S. alias search. You can see that in the bottom left there. And it shows there was embezzlement. And this person, the disposition, they were found guilty of embezzlement. And that was a misdemeanor offense, but they're guilty of embezzlement. And then on the right side, you can see that they were sentenced to 5 years of jail, actually, but that sentence is suspended, very typical, especially for a first offense. You're sentenced to 5 years of jail, but that's suspended, and we're going to put you on probation instead, a supervised probation for 5 years. So if you steal or embezzle again, then you're going to go right to jail. So, but for the employer, when they see this, all they see, and they don't know the situation, they see, oh my gosh, embezzlement. They stole from somebody. Typically, you're stealing from embezzlement, you're stealing from a company. I don't want to hire this person, he seems so good, but look, he's a thief. This James Bayberry in this example, it's not a real name, by the way, so if you're James, don't worry about it. So that's the idea of what can come back and be shown on like a background check, typically around criminal stuff, but it would show other pieces of information like this around those other things that we talked about that you can look at, from work history to credit reports to other types of legal liens or bankruptcies or whatever it might be that they're doing as part of this background check. And again, the employer is just trusting you, but they need to verify. So it's one of the final types of things that you're getting towards the end of the process. Again, typically a good sign, because it means they're very interested in you and are willing to pay somebody to do a background check on you, because they're getting close maybe to giving you an offer. And that's obviously a good thing.